Serious, what celebrity suffered the worst death? Anton Yelchin, who played Pavel Chekhov in 3 of the Star Trek movies in 2009, 2013, 2016. He died being crushed to death. I never want to feel that.
Comedian Robert Schimmel survived brutal chemo treatment for cancer. Used to make fun of his daughter learning to drive in his act. Killed in a car accident with his daughter behind the wheel.
Not one of the worst here, but I think of Naya Rivera. She went swimming in a lake with her son. They say that the boat drifted, so she must have had to swim a fair bit to reach the boat, which made her tired. Also talks of how she had a recent sinus infection and suffered from vertigo, and how that may have had an effect. She managed to get her 4-year-old son back onto the boat before drowning. Her son was found alone on the boat hours later. I can only imagine how desperate she must have felt. How terrifying it must be to be drowning, but also knowing that her son is alone on a boat in the middle of a lake. Knowing those fears and anxieties that she would have had while dying makes me feel so bad for her. Drowning is an awful way to go.
Sharon Tate. Everyone else listed on here died horrible but mostly quick deaths. Tate was literally begging for her life as she was being murdered.
Marvin Gaye was shot dead by his own dad.
Bob Crane of Hogan's Heroes fame was found bludgeoned to death with a tripod. He was hit so hard that blood was strewn across the walls and the ceiling. He also had an electrical cord wrapped around his neck that may have had some strangulation involved.
Probably the death of Judith Barcy from The Land Before Time is the worst I know. Shot in the head by her own father after being abused all her life. She was 10 years old. There's the story if anyone's interested.
The kid's an actor who died filming that Twilight Zone film. The scene where the helicopter flew a bit too low and ended up slicing them all up and killing them.
The guitarist from Anal Beep fell off an escalator and broke his neck.
Natalie Wood. She was terrified of water. Drowned in the middle of the night under suspicious circumstances.
Isadora Duncan was a famous dancer in the 20s. She liked to ride in open motor cars with her long flowing scarves around her neck. One of her scarves got caught up in the wheel of her motorcar.
I don't know if it's the worst, but I gotta go with Brandon Lee's accidental death during the filming of The Crow.
Annette Funicello. MS left her unable to even feed herself, walk, talk. Prisoner of her own body. Also, Christopher Reeves. Totally paralyzed, incredible human being. Too much suffering.
Dominique Dunn, the older sister from the Poltergeist, was strangled to death by her abusive ex, and he only served 3 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter.
Not the worst by far, but still a beep way to die. Actor William Holden bled to death in his apartment in Santa Monica after lacerating his forehead from slipping on a rug while intoxicated and hitting a bedside table. That's no fun.
Christina Grimmie was shot and killed at her own meet and greet.
Surprised no one has mentioned Kirsty MacColl, of Fairy Tale of New York. Died after being decapitated by a speedboat.
Comedian Tommy Cooper died of a heart attack while on stage, and everyone laughed at him as he died thinking it was part of the show. You can see the video online.
I'd say Selena Quintanilla. She got shot and killed by an obsessive fan. She was at the peak of her career where she won a Grammy, performed at the Astrodome Stadium in Texas, working on an English crossover album, and had recently removed her IUD to attempt getting pregnant. That one bullet to her back ended her life and affected millions who listened to Tejano music.
I'm hearing Paul Walker and others, but honestly, I think Judith Barcy got it unfairly. She was still a child when she became successful. Her father then turned demanding and abusive. He eventually shot her in the head while she slept. She was 10.
A few hockey players have had pretty horrific deaths. Hall of Famer Terry is the first that comes to mind. He was drunk and horsing around with his roommate when he somehow fell over his roommate's knee, and got severe internal injuries. Had to have his gallbladder removed, had multiple operations on his bleeding liver before dying of a pulmonary embolism all over the course of a couple months. He was 40. Howie is another. Snapped his leg in a game and was hospitalized. Over time he became depressed, he couldn't play, as he was totally bedridden. Over time, he felt more and more lonely and suffered a nervous breakdown according to team doctors. He tried to get up to use the bathroom, then died of a blood clot from his broken leg. He was 34.
Chris Farley comes to mind. He was struggling with drug addiction, and on the night he died, he was on the fourth day of a massive bender. His final morning, he hired a call girl to come to his apartment. Allegedly, she witnessed him struggling to breathe, and he said, "Don't leave me." She took his watch, took some photos of him collapsed on the floor, wrote a note, and left. His brother found his body.
Vic Morrow, a 50s-70s actor who was more known as Hard Sergeant of a WW2 TV series called Combat. Anyway, he was casted for a Twilight Zone movie. During shoot where he and Asian two girls tried to escape from an U.S. Army helicopter in Vietnam, somehow the hovering helicopter crashed down and its blades crash on top of them, killing all three instantly. He and one girl got decapitated and the other crushed under the crashed helicopter.
It's not the worst death because it was self-inflicted, but it always haunted me that Chris Farley's last words were, "Don't leave me to a prostitute," that snapped a picture of him dying on the floor before taking off and attempting to sell the pictures to the tabloids.
Answering my own question, I think Sharon Tate has to be up there. On a totally different note, I'm going to add Owen Hart.
I don't know if you'd consider him a celebrity, but Giles Corey was actually a real person, not just a character in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. When accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials, he refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, so the locals pressed him to death, meaning they put a board on his body and added stones slowly to try to pressure him into entering a plea. His last words were, "More weight." Also, just wanted to add that Corey was 81 years old at the time. Living that long in the 1600s in colonial America was a feat in and of itself.
Dominique Dunne, strangled by her ex in her driveway.
Two very different ends of the spectrum. But Phil Hartman was the single funniest character actor to come out of SNL. His wife had severe addiction issues, and when Andy Dick got her back on coke, she shot Phil in the head and turned the gun on herself. The other that came to mind was MCA from the Beastie Boys. He died of lung cancer not too long after he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If you listen to the Beastie Boys albums, you can hear his transformation from punk delinquent to evolved middle-aged man.
Alan Turing. Rewarded with chemical castration and eventual suicide for cracking the Enigma code and laying the blueprint for modern computers. Cruel way to go.
Princess Diana, being chased at high speed by paparazzi and her driver was drunk. Then when they did crash, the paparazzi took photos of her dying.
Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. You only have to look at the crime scene photos to know what happens when a professional athlete comes at you with a knife.
That I know of. Ayrton Senna crashed into a wall going at like 250 km/h.
The dude thought shot Ricky and boys in DA Hood was locked up and got brutality murdered and then used for a sacrificial ritual by his Satanist cellmate. I think he was dismembered as well.
Freddie Mercury's death was long and painful, and he had to hide his suffering from very noisy paparazzi in a time when AIDS was thought as punishment for being gay. Death from AIDS in the 80s and 90s was awful.
ABBA's drummer Ola Brunkert died when he fell through a glass door and cut his throat open. He lived long enough to try and wrap a towel around his neck and stumble into the garden. Also the Vic Morrow and the kids that John Landis killed by dropping a helicopter on them.
Manute Bol, NBA player. Died of a disease, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, where your skin slowly sloughs off your body. Horrifying.
Cliff Burton from Metallica. Got thrown out of a tour bus window, bus then fell on top of him. Crane was picking up the bus and it broke. The bus fell back on him, killing him.
Phil Hartman. Dude's wife straight up lost her beep and killed him while he was in mid-sleep.
Sharon Tate, her death was absolutely brutal.
Phil Hartman, killed by his own wife who he'd been married to for 10 years.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to subscribe to Upvote for the best quality content every day.